Right now, there is a strip of water 21 miles wide sitting between Iran and Oman. It has no extraordinary features, no famous skyline, no tourist destination, but approximately 20% of all the oil on Earth passes through it every single day. It is the most economically important choke point in human history. And the governments, oil companies, and military strategists who quietly run the global energy system have one nightmare they never say out loud. What happens if it closes and never reopens? To understand the stakes, you have to understand the geography. The Persian Gulf is essentially a bathtub. It is a semi-enclosed sea surrounded by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar, and Iran. The only way in or out is through the Strait of Hormuz. Every supertanker leaving Kuwait, every LNG carrier departing Qatar, every barrel of crude loaded at the terminals of Abu Dhabi has to squeeze through that same narrow corridor before it can reach the Indian Ocean and the rest of the world. There is no back door. There is no alternate route. The pipeline alternatives that exist today, like the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline or Saudi Arabia's East-West pipeline, can handle roughly 4 million barrels a day combined. The Strait handles 20 million barrels a day. The math does not work. The overflow has nowhere to go. In 1980, when Iran and Iraq were at war, tanker traffic through the Strait was disrupted and oil prices spiked nearly 40% in under a year. That was a partial disruption. A permanent closure is a completely different category of event. 17 million barrels of oil pass through the Strait daily. That is the combined daily consumption of China, India, and Germany. Countries like Japan and South Korea import roughly 80 to 90% of their oil through that corridor. They do not have a plan B. The United States, which dramatically reduced its own Gulf imports after the shale revolution, might look like it escapes the worst of it. But the global oil market does not work that way. Oil is priced globally. When 17 million barrels per day disappear from supply, the price does not go up for Japan and stay flat in Texas. It goes up for everyone, everywhere, at the same time. Analysts who modeled a full closure scenario put the immediate price spike at anywhere from $200 to $300 per barrel. Here's where it stops being an energy story and starts being an everything story. Oil is not just fuel. It is the raw material inside fertilizer, plastics, pharmaceuticals, and synthetic fabrics. When the price of oil triples, the price of shipping a container from Shanghai to Rotterdam triples with it. The price of growing wheat in Kansas goes up because diesel runs the tractors and natural gas feeds the fertilizer plants. Grocery bills spike within weeks, not months. Inflation in import-dependent economies does not creep up. It detonates. Central banks who spent years fighting inflation with interest rate hikes would face a supply shock they cannot print their way out of. Recessions in Asia and Europe would not be a risk, they would be a certainty. Not everyone loses equally, and this is where the geopolitics get uncomfortable. The United States, Canada, and Brazil all sit on massive domestic reserves. A Hormuz closure would be painful, but survivable. Russia, already locked out of Western markets by sanctions, routes its oil through Baltic and Pacific terminals entirely untouched by the Strait. It would become, overnight, the most indispensable energy supplier on the planet. The countries that face an existential crisis are the ones with no domestic production and no strategic reserves deep enough to buy time. Japan has roughly 140 days of reserves. South Korea has similar coverage. After that, the lights start going out, literally. Industrial output collapses, unemployment spikes, governments that were stable last year become fragile. A permanently closed Strait of Hormuz would not just be an energy crisis. It would be a realignment of the entire global order. The countries that built their economic identity around cheap, reliable Gulf oil would have to fundamentally reinvent themselves or collapse trying. The countries sitting on untouched reserves would find themselves holding the leverage that the Gulf states held for the last 50 years. The map of power we have lived with since 1945 would simply stop being accurate. The Strait has never permanently closed. Every simulation, every war game, every classified briefing treats it as a temporary disruption. but temporary assumes someone eventually reopens it. That assumption has never actually been tested, and the entire modern economy is built on the hope that it never will be.